she was just passing through, until a little girl said, "Want to meet my daddy?" What she found on that ranch changed everything. Wyoming Territory, summer 1887. Dry Hollow was a brittle place. The wooden buildings leaned like tired men, and the wind carried the scent of dust, gun oil, and old regrets. Even the sun seemed impatient, burning down on the town's single main road without mercy. Ellie Hayes walked that road like a shadow. 29, lean from hard time, her boots scuffed and the hem of her coat stiff with trail dust. She kept her eyes low and her steps measured, a woman used to silence, to suspicion, to people looking the other way. A tin sign squeaked overhead, Red Fern Diner. She stepped inside. The air shifted slightly, cooler. Inside, the clatter of dishes and murmurs of ranch hands filled the room. Ellie paused at the counter, sweat on her brow, hands trembling faintly from the heat and miles. "Water," she said. "Just a cup." The man behind the counter looked her over, tall, balding, with a grease-stained apron and eyes sharp as barbed wire. "You a traveler?" he asked. "Just passing through," Ellie replied, keeping her voice even. He nodded once, filled a cup from a jug behind him, and slid it across the counter. She reached for it. He did not let go. "Name?" Ellie hesitated. "Ellie Hayes." The room fell still. A man at a nearby table leaned back in his chair. "Heard that name. You're the one torched that cabin out near Salt Creek, ain't you?" "I did my time," Ellie said, lifting the cup slowly. "Wasn't guilty, but the jury said otherwise." "Funny how guilt's flexible," the man muttered. The bartender snatched the cup back. "Get out! We don't serve felons." Ellie stared at the water, throat tight. "It's just water." "Then go drink it from the river." She did not beg, did not plead, just nodded once, turned on her heel, and walked toward the door. In the corner booth, a little girl with a rag doll in her lap had been watching quietly. She was small, maybe 6 years old, with honey blonde hair in messy braids and freckles dotting her cheeks like tiny stars. She slid off her seat and followed Ellie outside. Ellie stood on the steps of the diner, blinking into the hard light, adjusting the strap on her satchel. "Hey," the little voice called. Ellie turned. The girl stood on the dusty boardwalk, barefoot, dress too big for her shoulders, but chin lifted like someone brave. "You want to meet my daddy?" she asked. Ellie frowned. "What?" "He's got horses," the girl said, "and pie." Ellie looked back at the saloon doors, then at the long stretch of road ahead. "I don't think your daddy wants company like me," she said. The girl shrugged. "He won't mind. You look like you need pie." Ellie almost laughed, and it startled her. It had been months since anything made her lips twitch. The girl held out her hand, palm dusty. "I'm Lila." Ellie hesitated. "Ellie. Come on, Ellie. It ain't far." Ellie looked again, down the road, at the sun waiting to punish her some more, and then at the little girl, who spoke like she already knew her. For the first time in years, Ellie did not feel like a burden or a danger or a name spoken behind someone's back. She reached out, took the small hand, and followed Lila toward the wagon hitched behind the diner. "Does your daddy know you're doing this?" Ellie asked, as she climbed up beside her. Lila grinned. "Nope." They rode off into the scrubland, the town shrinking behind them. Ellie glanced at the girl beside her, who hummed an off-key tune as the reins bobbed in her small hands. She had no idea where they were going, but it already felt more like a beginning than anything she had left behind. The road to the Carr Ranch twisted through pine-shubbed hills, the air turning cooler as they climbed. Ellie kept her hand near her satchel, scanning for signs of others, men with guns, barking dogs, the sort of thing she'd learned to anticipate. But the girl beside her just swung her legs and pointed at birds. "That's where Daddy talks to the trees," Lila said, gesturing toward a clearing. "He says they listen better than people." Ellie offered a nod, unsure what to say to that. When they arrived, Ellie almost missed the house. It was built low into the slope, long and wooden, with a mossy roof and a front porch sagging slightly under the weight of time. Ivy curled around the posts, one shutter hung crooked, but the windows were clean. Lila jumped down and ran to the door without knocking. "Daddy, I brought someone." Ellie climbed off the wagon slowly, boots crunching against gravel. The door opened. Marshall Carr stood in the threshold. He was tall, lean under a gray flannel shirt with dark trousers tucked into scuffed boots. His hair was shoulder length, dark with streaks of ash at the temples. But it was his eyes that caught her, pale gray, nearly silver, like smoke just before it vanished. He looked at Ellie the way one studies a sudden storm cloud, not with fear, but with the knowledge it might change everything. "You're Ellie," he said. Not a question. "I am." "She was thirsty," Lila added. "They threw her out. Again." Marshall's jaw clenched. Inside. Ellie didn't move. "You sure?" He nodded once. "No one gets turned away in this house." She stepped in. The scent of pine wood and leather filled the air. A fire crackled low in a stone hearth. The room was spare but neat. Worn books on the mantel, a rocking chair draped in a hand-stitched quilt. On the far wall, a framed photograph of a woman smiled gently toward the room. Ellie's eyes lingered on the image. "My wife," Marshall said. There was no warmth in his voice, only fact. Lila tugged at his shirt. "Can she stay, Daddy, just a little while?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Storm's coming tonight, roads'll turn to mud." He turned to Ellie. "You can take the guest room, couple days. After that, you'll need to move on." Ellie nodded. "That's fair." Lila ran off to chase the dog in the yard. Ellie remained in the doorway, studying the house. There were no women's shoes by the door, no fresh linens in sight. But on the arm of the rocker, a lace cloth still rested, yellowed with age. In the corner of the kitchen, a teacup sat upside down in a saucer, dustless. The house was empty of presence, but not of memory. "You keep it the same?" Ellie asked quietly. Marshall didn't look up. He poured coffee into two mismatched mugs. "She died 3 years ago, drowning, near the South Ridge." He passed her a cup. "I was away, with the law office in Sheridan." She took the coffee, but didn't drink. "Sorry." He nodded. And then, silence. He sat at the table and watched the fire. Ellie sat across, unsure whether she was being hosted or measured. He did not ask where she came from. She did not volunteer. But as Lila's laughter echoed through the window and the storm gathered in the sky, Ellie thought she saw it, just a flicker. When Lila passed by, her father's eyes followed her like they used to follow hope. And Ellie wondered how much of that gray in his eyes had come from ash, and how much had come from regret. Ellie settled into the car ranch like someone testing a pair of old boots, slowly, warily. She rose early, swept the porch, helped haul feed to the livestock. At first Marshall watched her without comment, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But he did not stop her. Lila, meanwhile, followed Ellie like a shadow with freckles. She asked questions, hundreds of them. "Why is your hair red? Did you know how to ride bareback? Do you believe ghosts can cry?" Ellie answered what she could, laughed at what she could not. One afternoon, while sweeping the back barn, she found a loose floorboard in the loft. Beneath it, buried in dust, was a small cloth-bound book with faded pink ribbon. It was a journal. The first page read, in neat cursive, June Avery Carr, 1882. Ellie hesitated, then turned the page. The entries were simple at first. Recipes, notes about Lila's first steps, a sketch of the stream that ran behind the house. Marshall will stay overnight in town again. He says the firm needs him more now. The house feels colder without him, but not just from absence. Another page. I thought I heard footsteps last night, on the porch, but when I opened the door, there was nothing, just the wind. Still, I locked the nursery window. Ellie flipped ahead, heart beginning to race. One entry was dated 3 years ago, 2 days before June's death. Marshall is gone for the week. I saw a rider near the ridge again, same horse, same hat. He didn't wave this time, just watched. There was a knock last night, not Marshall's, too hard, too slow. Ellie felt a chill crawl down her arms. The last entry. Lila has a fever. I'll go for feverfew in the morning. If I'm not back by sundown, tell her I sang to the trees. That was the day June's body was found, half submerged near the bend in the river. The coroner had called it an accident, slip and drown. But Ellie had seen women drown before. The bruises on their arms, the silence afterward. She turned the journal over, her thoughts spinning. Why was this hidden? She glanced out the window. Marshall was in the paddock, working with the gray mare. Lila sat in the grass, weaving flowers. That night Ellie could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the wind press against the wooden walls. The rocking chair in the front room creaked once, then fell still. Somewhere deep in the house, she thought she heard a door gently close. At breakfast, Marshall noticed the shadows beneath her eyes. "You all right?" "Did June write?" Ellie asked suddenly. He looked up. "What?" "Your wife. Did she keep a journal?" His fork paused mid-air. "I suppose. I never read it." "She never mentioned feeling watched?" He put down his fork. "What are you asking me, Miss Hayes?" Ellie hesitated. "The night she died, you were in town?" "I was." "Can anyone confirm that?" Marshall's jaw tightened. "You think I hurt her?" "I think someone did, and I think she knew it was coming." Marshall stood slowly. "You found something?" "I found her words." He stared at her for a long time, longer than he ever had. Finally his voice came low. "You should leave this alone." Ellie stood too. "I can't." Lila ran into the room, breathless. "Look what I made!" She held up a crown of wildflowers. "It's for Mama. I'm going to put it by the creek." Marshall's face softened. "I'll come with you." As they left, Ellie looked again at the chair by the fire, the embroidered cloth still perfectly placed. She no longer believed the house was empty of June, and now she wondered what else the house had buried. Ellie searched quietly, methodically, like someone assembling pieces of a map no one wanted found. Each day after chores, while Lila napped or played by the stream, she returned to the loft, the cellar, the forgotten corners of the ranch house where dust collected like secrets. She moved like someone who knew better than to make noise, who had learned in confinement how truth often lived behind silence. The old writing desk in the study creaked when she opened it. Its drawers had long been emptied of ink and paper, left only with the scent of cedar and old smoke. But when she tapped along the bottom, her knuckles met a hollow echo. A false base? She pried it up carefully, revealing a bundle of yellowed papers tied with a faded red string. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something closer to recognition. This string, this silence, felt too deliberate. Among the documents was a sealed envelope, thick, crisp, still unopened. The name printed in neat type across the front nearly stole the breath from her chest. To Mayor Horace Deaton, Dry Hollow Township. Her fingers broke the seal with slow reverence. Inside, a letter, dated 3 days before June Carr's death. She began to read. To Mayor Deaton, I write not for favor, but for justice. A group of landowners, led by Garvey Vennett, has been systematically manipulating township maps to absorb federal claim lands, lands which belong to families who cannot afford counsel or challenge. The Hayes property was among the first. Others will follow. This is no longer a legal matter, it is a moral one. If you ignore this, you are complicit. Respectfully, June Carr. Below the closing was a legal seal, and beneath that, a signature. Marshall Carr. The name hit Ellie like a thrown stone. She sat slowly, the edge of the bed barely holding her upright. The letter trembled in her lap. It was true, all of it. Everything she had whispered to herself in the dark silence of her cell. What the prosecutor had mocked as delusion. What her own lawyer dismissed as inflammatory. What no one believed when she raised her voice in court. The land she grew up on, her father's land, was taken. Her father beaten for resisting. She had gone to fight it. She had marched into the county records office and threatened to burn it down. A week later, a fire did break out in the courthouse stables. She was blamed. No evidence, no witness, just anger and timing. 5 years. Arson, endangering public property. The order for her arrest had carried one name. Marshall Carr. The very man whose daughter had crawled into Ellie's lap, whose hands had tended the fields beside hers, whose silence she had mistaken for gentleness. She stood, the letter pressed to her chest like a wound. She moved to the window and pushed it open. Outside, the sun had just begun to dip beyond the hills, slanting honey-colored light across the grass. She saw Marshall in the distance, leading a bay mare back to the barn. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, his hair dark with sweat. He moved slow, deliberate. And for the first time, she did not see the man Leela called Daddy. She saw the man who had signed her away. Ellie turned from the window. Her hands moved quickly, packing the few belongings she had, worn boots, a cotton shawl, her satchel, the journal, and the letter. She crept down the stairs, each board beneath her foot aching. In the living room, Leela's doll lay curled on the hearth. Ellie paused, long enough to brush its yarn hair straight. Then she slipped through the back porch, where the wind had begun to stir. She walked away, slow at first, then faster. The letter was tucked close to her ribs, the truth pressed tight against her skin. Behind her, the light in the house flickered on. She did not look back. Dry Hollow's town hall sat like a forgotten relic, its wood faded, windows clouded with dust. Ellie approached with the cautious weight of someone returning to a place that once unraveled her life. Inside, the air was thick with stillness and paper rot. She made her way past the empty clerk's station toward the back archives, where a dim lamp glowed. "Thought I heard footsteps," came a voice from the shadows. An old man rose from behind a stack of boxes, thin, gray-bearded, glasses pushed to the edge of his nose. "Well, I'll be. Eleanor Hayes." Ellie stiffened. "I remember your trial," he said, not unkindly. "Town turned on you real fast. Always thought there was more to that." "You still keep the council records?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "Not supposed to. But I'm a keeper by habit." She pulled the letter from her satchel, the one June Carr wrote. His eyes narrowed as he scanned it. June. Smart girl. Too smart. She came here, too. Right before she died. Said she had proof the council was funneling land back to Vennett and his circle. She died before she could send this. He swallowed. Yeah. And you? You got caught in the same net. Ellie clenched her fists. I want to see the files. All of them. He looked around, lowered his voice. Come with me. They descended into a storage room lined with cabinets. He unlocked one marked Zoning and Legal, 1880-1888. Here, he said, pulling a folder stamped Confidential Municipal Security Review. Inside were memos, land survey revisions, maps redrawn in red ink, legal complaints dismissed without hearings, and a court document. Her doc meant arrest order for Eleanor Hayes, filed by Town Prosecution, approved by Municipal Council Marshall Carr. But look here, the old man pointed, tapping the margins. See this? A faded stamp, classified, for council eyes only. Back then, he explained, they started marking some legal cases as security threats to prevent details from circulating. It meant the signatories, like Marshall, weren't allowed to read the contents before confirming procedural receipt. Ellie's chest rose, then fell slowly. He never knew what he signed. The old man nodded solemnly. Council pushed through a lot using that trick. Your land, other families. June Carr was digging into it. That's why they silenced her. So it was all a lie, Ellie whispered. He closed the folder. You weren't the first they tried to bury, but maybe you'll be the last to stay buried. Ellie stared at the files in her hands, her breath trembling. The man reached into a drawer, handing her a sealed envelope. She left this, he said. June. Said if anything happened to her, to give it to someone who could still make noise. Ellie took it carefully. Then she turned, eyes fierce now with purpose. She was not a ghost anymore, and she was not alone in the dark. The sun was sinking low behind the ridge when Ellie returned to the Carr ranch, her boots dusty, her shoulders squared, but heart uncertain. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of all she now knew. The wooden fence came into view just as a small figure came barreling toward her. Ellie! Lila's voice rang like wind chimes through the stillness. The little girl flung herself into Ellie's legs, arms clutching tight, face buried in the folds of her dusty skirt. I knew you'd come back. I told the chickens you would. Ellie knelt down and wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close. They clucked twice, Lila said solemnly. That means yes. Ellie laughed softly, breath-catching. Smart birds. From the porch, Marshall stood silently. His figure was still, almost carved into the dusk. His eyes found Ellie's across the yard. He said nothing, made no gesture, but the wind carried something between them that words would have only weakened. The front door stood open, just enough to catch the light. Inside, Ellie saw a folded wool blanket placed on the rocker near the hearth, a tin plate covering what smelled like warm cornbread, and a neat stack of freshly chopped wood resting beside the stove. Not a welcome, but a home waiting to be picked up again. She stepped inside and felt the air shift, like a storm had rolled through and scrubbed the place clean, leaving only the scent of pine and rising bread behind. She did not speak of what she'd learned at the town hall. Not yet. Not while the dust was still settling inside her. The days that followed passed without spectacle. Chickens fed, horses brushed, water hauled, the fence on the west edge mended. Ellie worked alongside Marshall, their tasks simple, their words few. She did it not because she owed anyone, but because the rhythm steadied her. Like the land itself was reminding her how to breathe again. Lila followed Ellie everywhere, her chatter soft as a breeze. At night, Ellie sat near the hearth, writing in the pages of June Carr's notebook. The leather was worn, The ink faded, but the words felt fresh under her fingertips. She hadn't yet decided what to do with the letter June had written, the one she never got to send. Then, one evening, it happened. Ellie was pulling a tray of biscuits from the cast-iron oven when the edge caught her hand. The pain was immediate and sharp, slicing through her palm. She gasped, the tray slipping from her grip, crashing to the floor. Dough scattered, sizzling on contact with the hot stones. She muttered a curse under her breath and stumbled back, reaching for a towel. Before she could move, a shadow crossed the room. Marshall was there. He knelt beside her, took her injured hand gently, and guided her to the wash basin. No words, no fuss, just quiet, deliberate care. He poured cool water over the burn, his other hand steadying hers. Then, from his shirt pocket, he pulled a scrap of linen and wrapped it carefully around her palm. "You didn't deserve what they did to you," he said softly, "and neither did she." Ellie looked up, startled by the weight of his voice. For the first time, he was not avoiding her gaze. He was meeting it. She swallowed. "You were part of it." His eyes flickered with pain. "Unwittingly, but yes." She waited for the fire in her chest to flare again, for the bitterness. It did not come. He reached for her other hand, unburned, unguarded, and held it. Not tightly, just enough. "I can't undo what happened," he said, his voice a low echo. "But I can make sure what happens next is different." Ellie stared at him for a long breath, then nodded. That night she slept under the roof he had repaired, her hand wrapped in linen and her heart wrapped in something gentler. Marshall Carr did not say any grand words of apology or love, but in his silence she heard something just as strong. A beginning. Spring crept slowly into the bones of Dry Hollow, bringing with it tender greens on the cottonwoods and the scent of fresh soil after rain. At Carr Ranch, the land softened, and so did the people. Ellie stayed. She built her mornings on black coffee and bread dough, her afternoons on chalk and paper. With board salvage from the old fence and the stubbornness only a woman forged by fire could carry, she turned the empty barn loft into a schoolroom. She painted a sign in crooked letters, "Care Hollow Learning Corner." It was not grand, but it was real. The children came in twos and threes, barefoot, sun-browned, hesitant at first. Some carried only a stick for a pencil, others a hunger for something beyond survival. Ellie taught them letters, then words, then stories. She showed them how to hold a pencil like it was power. She taught them to sign their names like planting roots. Lila became her helper, her shadow, her voice when Ellie's own felt too cracked to use. The townsfolk, once whispering behind curtained windows, began to nod when she passed by the general store. Some even smiled, tipping their hats. They no longer called her that woman who went to prison or Marshall Carr's stray. They called her Miss Ellie, who baked sweetbread and taught their children to read under cottonwood trees. One bright afternoon, while cleaning the main room of the house, Ellie found Lila hunched over the dining table with berry-stained fingers and crayon tips worn to nubs. The little girl had drawn something, clumsy in shape but vivid in meaning. "It's us," Lila said proudly, holding up the paper. "See? That's you, and that's Mama June. You're both holding the ranch like this," she stretched her arms wide, "so it don't fall over." Ellie took the picture and stared at it, throat thick. Two women, one in memory, one in flesh, both cradling a single roof between them. Past and present, grief and grace, sketched in a child's hand. Later that week, Marshall did something Ellie never expected. She walked into the sitting room, still dusting flour from her apron, and froze. Her breath caught mid-step. Above the fireplace, where only one frame had rested for 3 years, now hung two. To the left, the soft sepia portrait of June Carr, face calm, eyes like distant rain. To the right, a new photograph. Ellie laughing wide, her hair wind-tossed, Lila perched like a star on her shoulders. The picture had been taken weeks ago, under the cottonwood tree where June used to sit and write. Beneath the two frames sat a small brass plate, polished to a shine. It read, "Car home, lit by her, kept warm by her." Ellie stepped back, overcome. Her hands trembled against her skirt. The simple act undid something in her chest that had stayed locked too long. She said nothing, just turned, opened the front door, and walked onto the porch, heart heavy and light all at once. Marshall followed not long after, boots soft on the wooden floor. He stood beside her as the sun dipped behind the pine-tipped hills, the sky blushing with gold and lilac. "I didn't know if it was the right thing," he said, voice low and unsure. "It was," Ellie whispered. "You didn't choose between us. You honored both." He nodded once, slowly. "She was the flame," he said. "But you're the one who kept it alive." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She looked at him, not with gratitude or confusion, but with the quiet knowing of someone who had finally been seen, wholly and without weight. No one said the word love. No one needed to. Not that night. The land, the house, the girl, the man, they had all shifted, subtly but forever. And as laughter spilled from the kitchen behind them and stars blinked alive one by one, Ellie Hayes stood in the doorway of the Carr home and finally saw herself not as a visitor, not as a burden, not as a ghost of some story long buried, but as the hearth, the one who stayed, the one who warmed, the one who kept the light. 1 year had passed since the day Ellie Hayes first set foot on Carr Ranch, with dust on her boots and nowhere to belong. The seasons had done their work, softening sharp edges, turning hard soil to bloom. Spring gave way to summer, summer to harvest, and now again the lilacs trembled under morning dew. The paperwork had been signed in the town hall just last week. Legal guardianship awarded to Eleanor Hayes Carr, the judge had said, stamping the document with a final thud. Lila was officially hers. That night, when Ellie tucked the girl into bed, Lila reached out, her small hand brushing Ellie's cheek. "Are you really my mama now?" she whispered. Ellie nodded, eyes shimmering. "Yes, baby, I always was. Now, it's just on paper, too." In the months leading up to that day, Ellie and Marshall had built more than a family. They had turned the old supply shed into a tiny storefront, Carr Hollow Goods. There, Ellie sold loaves of honey bread wrapped in linen and jars of dried herbs she had harvested herself, rosemary, calendula, wild chamomile. Marshall raised hens and bees, brought eggs and amber jars of honey. He built wooden shelves and painted a sign that simply said, "Made from the land, for the ones who stay." It became a quiet success, not grand but steady. Folks stopped by on their way to town, not just for goods, but for the feeling of something honest. Then, one late afternoon in October, Marshall walked Ellie out past the fields to the edge of the property, where the land sloped down into a grove of pines. The air was crisp, laced with the scent of resin and cedar. He stopped beneath the largest tree, its bark gray with age. "This was hers," he said, kneeling at the base. "June planted rosemary here every spring, said it kept bad spirits out." Ellie looked down. Fresh rosemary now grew in neat rows around the trunk. "She was right," Ellie said softly. Marshall stood and turned toward her. In his hand was a simple leather string. Hanging from it was a small silver pendant, worn at the edges, shaped like a flame. He held it out. "It ain't fancy, but it's true." She took it, fingers trembling. Unpack, engraved in small letters, "Not passing through anymore." Ellie blinked back tears. "You made this?" He shrugged, voice rough. "Had help with the silver. But the words? They came from here." He tapped his chest. Ellie looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and took his hand. "I was blamed for fire," she said, voice cracking. "But maybe I was just meant to carry light." He pulled her into him then, slow and sure. They stood together beneath the pine, past ghosts behind them, new roots beneath. Later that week, Marshall carved a new sign for the front gate. He sanded it smooth, coated it in beeswax, and hung it where every visitor would see. The words were burned deep into the grain. "Here rests no ghost, only love that's stayed." And on evenings when the wind was gentle and laughter danced from the kitchen window, travelers would pass by the ranch and pause, not for directions, not for shelter, but to glimpse something real. Not a woman passing through, but one who stayed. She walked in as a stranger, dusty and forgotten. She stayed as a mother, a partner, a flame that never dimmed. Some love stories are born in grand ballrooms, but the truest ones, they're carved in pine wood, whispered in kitchens, and found in the eyes of a child who simply says, "Want to meet my daddy?" Thank you for riding with us through this story. If it moved you, if it reminded you that redemption is real and love can find even the most broken souls, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. Here, we don't just tell tales. We keep the fire burning for those who need to remember. Love never just passes through. Sometimes it stays forever. Hit the bell, join the ride, and let your heart stay a little longer.